Howdy, howdy, folks. Welcome to Atheists on Air Beyond the Trailer Park, episode 199. We're one away from the big 2-0, and I still have no clue what we're going to do for that one. But, anyways, tonight, I seem to be a little short-handed. I'm not sure where Sam is. I know Morgan's in the midst of moving, so I'm not expecting her tonight, but Sam should be popping in anytime, hopefully. If not, it's going to be really boring listening to me talk for 2 hours, and that's why I have Tucker here with me. And welcome, Tucker.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
As I said before we went live, I said it's nice to see you and talk to you again. I had the pleasure of meeting you 2 years ago at 2 years ago at NanoCon down in Tennessee, which was a trip to behold because I had literally just came off of travel restrictions. So I was like, I rode down with Deb and her husband Arno, and I was like, I have no idea how this is gonna go because I get motion sick. I had trouble with motion sickness before my strokes. Well, it got worse after my strokes, but so far so good. I've cut back on a lot of my meds. It seems my doctor had me over medicated. So yeah. So hopefully, if there is a NanoCon next year, I will be making it down for that. Preferably not barfing the whole way there. Yeah, it's really bad when you get into your BFF's car to go to the store, which is 5 minutes from my house, and you can't even make it to the store without getting sick in the car. Yeah, so that's why Beth does not travel. So, but welcome, Tucker, and your show is Atheists in the Trailer Park, correct? I get it buffed with ours. And actually, you came out not too much before us, correct?
I think. Well, yeah, probably. I'm on episode 251, so.
Yeah, and we've missed a few episodes in there, so yeah, I think because I remember Deb saying something about discovering you, and I was like, oh yeah, we definitely gotta have him on. And how's your kitty?
Well, Fuzznuts is right here,
I was hoping he was.
Being a pain as usual.
Hi, Fuzznuts.
And I'm up 3 cats since I was last on because the other cat I had died suddenly.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then I wound up, some asshole dumped a declawed cat in the neighborhood. And I found him, and I was like, well, you're declawed. I can't let you be an outside cat. I got to take you inside because you'll die. And then this tuxedo cat got in the house a couple of months ago, and the thing, I can't get anywhere near it. It hides in my room, and it's getting more trustful of me. But it's still pretty much like, in the horror movies, the thing that moves around in the shadows and the dark. That's how it is most of the time. And then at the beginning of the month, end of last month, one of my neighbors knocked on my door and says, we found a kitten in the road. Can you take care of it? And I mean, the thing is, fits in the palm of my hand, so you can't leave that outside.
Yeah.
So I've got that. Fortunately, Fuzznuts and the kitten get along fine. He doesn't get along with the other two.
Yeah. Yeah, I just have the one moose breath still, and I got him when he was no more than 2 weeks old. I had to bottle feed him for 2 weeks. God, so, yeah. Well, what happened is it was not really a stray, but a barn cat.
Yeah.
At my boss's place, and she has an Irish wolfhound.
Oh.
Whose paws at the time were bigger than the kitten.
Yeah.
And the mother abandoned it. So she's like, she brought the kitten down. I was like, oh, what a cute kitten. And she's like, yeah, can you foster it? And this was like literally maybe a month after my first stroke or second stroke. I can't remember now. And I'm like, I can barely take care of myself. How the fuck am I going to take care of a cat?
Yeah.
And needless to say, this kitten that used to fit. I mean, my hands are small.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, he fit in the palm of. Now he's about 25 pounds, and he knows that mommy can't bend over and pick him up. So he'll get down as low on the ground as he possibly can. But he's been my therapy cat since I've had him. So, but it was funny because she was like, "We just need you to foster him until he gets bigger." And I looked at her and I'm like, "We've known each other at this time for about 11 years." And I'm like, there's no such word as foster in either of ours language. And generally they don't allow pets because I live above the restaurant. They don't have pets in this building specifically because of that. They didn't, any odor, they didn't want to travel downstairs or anything. And so, yeah, they broke their own rules so I could foster a kitty that I now have had for 3 years. It's like, but yeah, he's my little well, I can't say little because he's a freaking horse. I mean, I can barely pick him up.
Yeah, well, that declawed cat that I rescued, he's a big cat.
Yeah.
He looks like a stegosaurus. He's got this big body, this tiny little head on, and all he does is lay around. He's actually the kind of cat I would, if I was out of all of them, really, if I was picking them based on their personality, he's the one I'd pick because he does what I wanted from a cat. Just lays there and occasionally comes up and says, "Hey, pay attention to me." Yeah. Whereas Buzznuts wants it all the time.
That's funny because Zorro could care less about attention. The only time he, quote, seeks attention is like when I first come home from work. And it's funny because he knows my footsteps up the stairs. He knows Andy, one of the guys I work with downstairs, who also lives up here. And then he knows both their husband and wife. So my landlords, they know Marlene's walk and they know Dave's walk. And I can always tell when Marlene's here when I don't actually hear her because the cat will go to the door and fucking paw at the door and want to go see Marlene. And what's funny is he wants to go see her so badly, but he fucking bites. I mean, you give him any attention, you can maybe last 2 seconds, and then because he didn't have any litter mates, he doesn't realize that biting hurts.
Yeah.
And, he doesn't bite to hurt you. He just, I think the petting, it gets too overstimulating for him, and he kind of bites to stop. But what's funny is he's really nasty he can be really nasty biting wise, but when he paws at you and stuff and plays with his paws, he's really gentle, he's really careful, but not, climb, unless he's trying to climb your back while you're on the computer. He's done that a couple times with me. I have all these little claw marks in my back. But yeah, he's probably the bizarrest cat I've ever had. Where my other cat that my landlord's daughter has, because when I moved, I couldn't have my cat, and I have a cat now. But she has my old cat, Young G. And she was a attention whore. I mean, literally, she had to be touching me in some way, shape, or form, no matter where I was in the apartment. So I used to have my computer CPU down on the floor, so she would lay partly on that and partly on my lap. Zorro, he wants nothing to do. He hears me talking on the computer or something, and he goes and does his thing. But every now and then, he feels his oats that he should not have, because he got deballed when he was like 4 months, and he'll just rip around the apartment. And like the whole back shelf behind me used to have knickknacks. Not anymore. He's wiped that whole shelf out. My books, I used to have like beer bottles and a couple wine glasses, and it's like, yeah, that lasted a week.
Yeah.
He'll just rip through the apartment like there's no tomorrow. And it's a 1-room apartment. It's an efficiency. And it's like, cat, you can't do this. So I have to let him run in the hall just so he can have more space. And he thinks he owns the hall. So it's like, yeah, but I'd be lost without him. Yeah. He's my royal pain in the ass, but I love him. He's a furry pain in the ass. But so tell us about Atheists in the Trailer Park.
Well, I alternate the episodes. 1 week I'll do a news episode, and then the other week I'll do. Well, right now I'm reading from the Pistis Sophia, which is the first Gnostic text ever discovered. It's not the oldest ever written that we know about, but it's the first that was ever discovered. And so me and a guy from Canada who goes by the name of Skullbeard will take turns reading from it. And it's not really entertaining. It's kind of, it's interesting in some aspects, but it's, it's slightly better than the Book of Mormon.
That's not saying much.
No, I know.
We'll get into a bit more about the Pistis Sophia, but yeah, I can relate to that because, as I've said before, I used to do for my blog. I started reading and doing like a review. I don't know if that's be a good criticism review type thing of some of the older texts. Like my first one was Instructions of Shirapek, which is pretty fragmented, so it's not a solid read. But it's like, and I would compare it to like the Bible as far as like that's. If you wanted to take it this far, you could. A lot of the Proverbs and the commandments actually come from that.
Yeah.
And that is the hypothesis. One of the hypotheses is that the Bible is basically, I got the burps, older texts, and they hijacked it into their own. But I can, yeah, some of the Gnostic texts are interesting.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that a bit more. So you do news and you do your readings.
Yeah, and that's generally what I do is alternate between those two things. Do one episode a week.
So you stick to just primarily one episode a week then?
Yeah. And if there's something big that happens, I'll squeeze out a bonus episode or something like that. But generally, it's just one episode a week, and some weeks I can barely manage to get that out.
Yeah, that's why we had to go to every other week because with work, I mean, I work, well, all three of us work, and we all work kind of different shifts, and it's like, yeah, trying to get background material for, a guest that we're not familiar with. It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I enjoy it. I'm not saying that I don't enjoy it, but sometimes, like, I'll readily admit today I got absolutely shit done for us, and it's a good thing I know primarily what your show is about. I'm a little behind.
Yeah, that's okay.
on listening, but it's like it really is. I mean, do you find? I mean, I know you actually. I'm sorry, I got a terrible itch. You had taken a break for a while.
Yeah, because it can turn into a grind, and I just had to stop because it was taking me so much time to put together a news episode, and I mean I was working on it just last minute, and it's like I gotta have some space. I gotta get some oxygen. I can't because this isn't paying enough to be my full-time gig. And
yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, like, I know when Dub and I started Beyond the Trailer Park, we never had any intentions to, quote, make money on it, make a living off of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking away from anybody that does attempt to make a living off of it. More power to you. I mean, I do it because I enjoy it. Yeah. And, I'm kind of narcissistic. I like to hear myself talk. No. I do because I enjoy bullshitting with people.
Yeah.
So, I always said when it became too much like work, I'm done. Because I already have a job.
Yeah.
Okay, granted, it's a pretty easy job comparable to what some people do, like Morgan is a fucking lawyer. Yeah, I wouldn't want that job and try to put out a podcast. I mean, that'd be pretty hard because, yeah, she might be a 9-to-5er, but sometimes, I mean, she said she's taking stuff home. or she's been at the office late. I mean, and then to think about, and I know you work at a fairly normal job. You know, you have set hours per se. Where mine is basically, I go downstairs for 4 hours, 6 hours at the most, sometimes longer, but not always. But I'm also on call 24/7.
Yeah.
Because when somebody doesn't show up, it's usually, oh, call back. She's probably home, because I usually am, because I don't go anywhere. So it's like I get called down. I'll be in the middle of a conversation. I'll be like, oh, got to go to work. Bye. The only days I don't is Mondays because we're closed. But yeah, so I can understand the feeling of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it dread, but just trying to pump out episode. I was really shocked though when you took that little hiatus. I was like, oh wow, because you know you were always so into it.
Yeah. Well, it's just, you hit a wall, and
Yeah.
you got to back up and go around if you can't go through. So that's what I did.
Well, and like you said in your one post on Facebook, is that you have other interests that you were neglecting, and you felt kind of like you were missing out because you weren't, doing other things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think for any podcaster, I mean, you got to find that balance between your job, your actual job that you make money at to pay your bills, your hobby. And I'm not trying to make light of what we do as a hobby, but being a podcaster.
Yeah.
And then, like, well, okay, right now you're reading the Pistis Sophia. I mean, for most regular people, reading the Pistis Sophia would be like a chore.
Well, it is for me too.
Well, it's a chore, but it's something you're interested in doing.
Yeah. Well, and having a partner that one of us can read a paragraph, while the other one can think up one-liners. Hell.
Well, I know you had Deb on to do. You said it before the show, and I forgot what it's called already.
Bible myths and their parallels in other religions.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny because it's like she would read a section and be like, "What the fuck?" I mean, granted, you have to take into how it was written and the culture it was written in.
Yeah.
I mean, but if I remember correctly, there were a lot of religious, what's the word I'm looking for? Not parallels. But just like to us, it just was like really bizarre.
Yeah. It's overly verbose
yes.
language. Yeah, from the time period, and then and I mean, the dude would sometimes essentially take a verse and go break it down word by word, and that's I mean, it's informative, but it can be a chore to read.
Yeah, it can be very monotonous. Yeah, I know. And I think what saved me with the instructions of Shirapeka is something I was interested in because it kept popping up in my research, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? So I went and looked. So I had that curiosity, and being the way it was written, it wasn't. Whereas like the Pistis Sophia would be a chore to read. I haven't read it in 15 years. I think my friend Robert tried to get me to read it, and I never got around to it. But it'd be one of those. I like books on audio as well, especially now with my eyesight being so bad that it's I get more out of that because I'll lay down before while trying to fall asleep, and I'll put a audio book on and listen to that. I probably could get through it better that way than actually having to read it.
Yeah.
But so tell us about Pistis Sophia. What got you? What piqued your interest about it, and why are you focusing on that one now?
Well, because Skullbeard and I finished reading up all the Apocrypha, which There's the
Right.
Greek Apocrypha, there's the Catholic Apocrypha, there's the Russian Orthodox Apocrypha, and there's the Ethiopian Apocrypha,
Mm-hmm.
which, and it's in the Ethiopian Bible is the only Bible that has all the Apocrypha in it, um, except for a handful of books. Those books have never been translated into English, so there wasn't really any way you could do them. There was a couple that had been done in uh, Rastafarian,
Mm-hmm.
which we struggled through, and eventually I had to decode what and translate that into modern English because it was, what the hell does any of this mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was poking around because there's a couple of sites that have all the texts, the various Gnostic texts and things like that. And I was planning on doing like the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. And then looking on one of them, and I saw Pista Sophia, and I'd never heard of it. And I was looking at it, and it said, it was the first Gnostic text ever discovered, and it was, discovered in the late 18th century, right around the time of the American Revolution, as a matter of fact. And I was like, well, I've never heard of it, and it was the first one, so I figured we'll do that, and then we'll move on to, the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi Library and things like that. And so it's been interesting because the thing that just jumps out at you is that it's set 11 years after the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is teaching his disciples. And it's like, wow. So according to these guys, Jesus hung around for a long time after he got nailed to that tree. And unfortunately, it's not an entertaining read because it's it's Jesus teaching his disciples, and every chapter starts out with either Jesus saying something, like in the beginning, it's Jesus is talking about Sophia, which is the goddess, but not really a goddess of wisdom, right?
Okay.
They borrowed the goddess of wisdom from some culture, but they scribbled off the goddess part.
Okay.
And he's talking about her being trapped in one of the levels of heaven. And so he's, and he's describing how they have to, get her up to the innermost level of heaven. And it's like 13 levels. She has 12 or 13 levels. I forget which, but there's a zodiacal connection to it anyways. And, and then he says this stuff, and then somebody says, oh, well, and then proceeds to quote some book from the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
at length. Or it starts out with, Jesus sitting there and one of the disciples saying, Jesus, I have a question about this thing. And then it's Jesus quoting the text from the Bible. I mean, in both cases, they add some commentary. And it's interesting because you have, it says Mary, and I've never been able to figure out which Mary they mean, but apparently all three of them are supposed to be there talking to Jesus. And
Right. Right.
they're all, and it's interesting because they're all treated equal as to the men. In other words, it's not you don't have a place to speak because you're a woman, or you're a woman,
Well,
you can only understand a little bit about it.
well, and that's, if I remember correctly, is one of the reasons, like, the Catholic Church primarily considers it so heretical because of the level they put the three Marys as disciples, and to them, that's what. In fact, I was just watching uh, History Channel type. I don't remember exactly who did it, on Mary Magdalene, and they were talking about how that she was the whole prostitute story, and how that was
Yeah,
actually supposedly an invention of the church to belittle her standing, because she was, if you go back into, earlier readings like Pistis Sophia and stuff like that, she was a disciple. She was actually above Peter in some regards.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and they consider Peter the first pope, and yada yada yada. And it's like, so they created this, Mary Magdalene was, was a prostitute, but there was actually two other Marys that a lot of people don't realize that are actually mentioned in the Bible, in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And they kind of conflated all three into Mary Magdalene to make her look out to be this, awful woman. In actuality, possibly there's some speculation she was Jesus's wife, although that mostly comes from the Da Vinci Code. Um,
Well, it comes from Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which
yeah,
is where
thank,
he got the
yeah,
idea for the Da Vinci Code.
yeah. I couldn't think of the name of the book. Thank you. I
Yeah.
was like, I know it's not the Da Vinci Code, but hopefully they'll get the idea. Yeah. So I mean, it comes from that, but it's it's just like, I would love to be able to go back, like take a time machine back to the time period to see. I mean, this is assuming that Christ doesn't exist and all the other,
Right.
you know, and see exactly how the three Marys were treated, how women were treated by Christ himself. Because I can almost guarantee it's probably not like how the church has it today.
Well, the pattern of a new religion is always, when they start out, they preach equality between men and women, and then as the church becomes more powerful, the men take dominance over the women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as a matter of fact, I don't know if I've got that link or not. I'll see if I can't. Let me see if I can't pull it up here, real quick. I don't remember if I got to cover the story or not. Um, but they found. Uh, yeah, I got this story. They found artwork from the early. I'm scrolling through here to see where I can find, like, the 5th and 6th century, that indicates women were uh, held in equal standing as men in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll drop the link in the chat if you want to take a look at it at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but that seems to be the pattern across religions, is that they bring, in the beginning, they bring women in, and after they get established, then they say, no, women, you're subservient to men. And the Eric Hoffer, who wrote The True Believer, claims that all your modern revolutions, at least up until when he wrote the book, were made entirely possible because of women.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, the America's founding fathers went to France and they hung out with these rich, wealthy widows who, because they were women, couldn't do anything, and so they would hold these salons where
Mm-hmm.
they would let guys like Jefferson and um, Franklin show up and talk and explain, give their case, make their case for why France should help, the colonies in the Revolutionary War, and that's where it all came from. And heck, most of George Washington's money came from Martha.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, especially now. I mean, we're seeing how, we'll say in the last 70-ish years, the role, well, maybe even longer. We'll say 100. I mean, the roles of women have changed,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and those that seem to fight against it the most are like the Catholic Church. I know some fundamentalist religions are huge on keeping women subservient. There are actually, we have some politicians that are religiously motivated that want to abolish women's right to vote.
Yeah, yeah,
Because they want to keep women subservient.
yeah. Well, what's her? Ann Coulter, supposedly that's what she wants.
Yeah, Ann Coulter's one of them. Michelle Bachmann is another one.
Yeah,
But it's like like we'll joke sometimes on the show about how any woman could be a Republican is beyond me.
yeah, yeah,
I'm not saying that the Democrats are any better, because there's some in the Democrats that believe the exact same way. They're just not as vocal.
yeah, yeah. No, no, you're right about that. It's
Yeah, but I mean,
but
from reading like the Pista Sophia and the other ones, I mean, what is your biggest take from reading something like Pista Sophia? Why would it be important for somebody like me or anybody else in the community to read something like the Pista Sophia?
well,
So far,
so far, I mean, it's honestly, I tell you, I really wish there was an astronomer who would take an interest in reading that, because there are certain things that crop up in there, and I know enough about astronomy to know that they're related to something dealing with the stars, but I can't figure out
well,
what it is.
there's a whole field or a whole, I don't know if I want to call it a belief system, but it's called astrotheology. And basically, the premise, if I remember correctly, is basically that the religions we have today are based in stargazing or astrology, not astronomy, astrology. And they were, as we advanced, they became religion. I know Acharya, us, who we, before she passed, we had on our show a couple of times, and I was friends with her. She was really into the astrotheology aspect, where that, and why a lot of the myths are so similar is because they were all looking at basically this in the northern hemisphere, anyways, looking at the same stars. So they were coming up with very similar stories as to what was happening in the cosmos, as far as with the stars, moving and the shifting and the various constellations at different times of the year. And that's how they explain, how parents explain to their kids, good and bad. They
Yeah,
use the stars to tell a story. I mean, it goes much deeper than that. Just that, I mean,
yeah,
I haven't touched astrotheology since Lataria passed. But she has a bunch of stuff that is still available on her website dealing with it. And then I know there's YouTube videos talking about it, but you got to take those with a grain of salt, because some of them get really weird.
yeah,
But if
yeah,
you can find a good documentary type, you can look on YouTube under astrotheology. I mean, there's some really whacked ones.
yeah,
I discovered that. It was like, whoa, okay, that's a little too far. But you can see, I mean, I don't know how I feel about it. Is it something that is legitimate? I don't know if there's any research supporting it, saying that, yeah, it's possible they got this story from how this, as far as the historical aspect of it, but that's one notion that's out there about astrotheology.
yeah. Well, I have a feeling that a lot of them, they started out as stories that you would tell, and you would, and you would say, you know, you point to like the stars, and you would tell the story and point to the specific constellation, because that was your calendar. And so the story would relate, well, this is what happens now, so that means this is what's going to happen in the future. And that's really what I would like to get into, is like, okay, this aspect of the story has to be relating to something with, telling you like what time a year it is, and, whether or not you need to, prepare to follow the buffalo or elk or whatever, or if you can settle in and camp for this summer or whatever, things like that. I'm sure there's a key to that somewhere, but I've never been able to look it up. But and then I guess the other thing I would say about this is, this stuff, the text, they think was originally written in the fourth century CE. So it's almost as old or older than some of the books in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember who. Well, yeah, I know. I take that back. No, I don't. Somebody put forth the idea that whoever was the founder of the sect at Qumran, which we don't know anything about who that person was. We have vague description of him that are sort of like, how you'd see the president in the movies in the 1950s, just a shadowy figure in the background, and maybe you'd hear his voice, but you wouldn't see the face of the actor or anything like that. Somebody made the case that if there was actually a Christ, it was the guy who founded the sect at Qumran. And reading this, it kind of leads me in that direction. That it could very well be. Of course, I don't know if this was ever, if this was part of the stuff they found at Qumran, at Nag Hammadi, or not. But then again, they just turned up a whole bunch of stuff near there not too long ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been following a lot of the Dead Sea Scroll stuff. Friend of ours and friend of the show, Deanna, and I have a similar interest in the issue with, especially the post 2002 alleged fake Dead Sea Scroll fragments.
Oh yeah.
And well, it involves the Museum of the Bible and the Greens and all that crap, and so it's interesting to see like the development of the ideas of how or why this stuff was wrote, because like we know nothing of the Qumran. I mean, the guesstimate is that it's possibly Essenes, most likely Essenes and stuff like that. But then again, who were the Essenes? We know just so much. We don't know enough to say, well, Pistis Sophia or books like Pistis Sophia are written by them. I mean, the whole like Gnosticism as a whole has been so.
Well, it's so thoroughly scrubbed from the historical record.
Yeah, exactly. And in a way, I mean, and that's sad in a way, because it takes away, well, literally from our history.
Yeah.
It is not just, I mean, it is, worldwide, not just U.S., but I mean, granted, goat herders, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
While we may think that they are uneducated, but to see how they thought about their world at that time and what was occurring or not occurring, we lose out on their insights. And I think that's, I think, we blame primarily the Catholic Church for suppressing that information. I think that's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it interesting reading some of the older texts that we've translated, obviously, to English. There's almost an innocence to it. It's like, yeah, I kind of want to know, maybe go back to that, or maybe not. But they're not as stupid as people think, and that's why I look at TV shows like Ancient Aliens. It's like, I mean, it's so, white man did it. No, white man didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's like, I think we lose so much. It's like, there was a meme the other day I saw. I mean, I know it's been floating around for a while now, basically saying that, if Christ existed, obviously, he wouldn't even be in this country.
Yeah.
Because of where he's, allegedly from.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you say, I'm such a great Christian, or, whatever religion you happen to believe in, they all have Christ in there in some way, shape, or form, at least the Abrahamics, obviously. But yet, your stance now on, using the whole issue down at the southern border, you wouldn't even let him in the fucking country.
Yeah.
So it's like, And then there was one of the groups I'm in. I think it's Shit Creationists Say. They had a posting from somewhere. I don't remember exactly. It's one of the religious groups well, anti-religious groups I follow, and people who troll other groups. And basically, this woman was saying, "Well, Christ was a white guy." I mean, that's what it came down to. It's like, no,
No, no, no.
no, he was not white, blonde hair, and blue eyed. And it's like, yes, he was. It's like, seriously, it's like,
I've now I've heard, and I don't remember any of the details of it, but I have heard the arguments made by the neo-Nazi types about how Christ was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and they're a little more sophisticated than, well, yes, he was, but it's like, wow, you're reaching there an awful lot, pal.
yeah. Well, that's the part of the problem I have, like, going back to the ancient aliens, because if you take it down to, and I'm not saying Zachariah Sitchin's version, because I don't get this feel from him, but more the Von Daniken on up. Basically, it's a very racist belief, because it really boils down to, well, if like with the pyramids, they say, well, the Egyptians couldn't build the pyramids, the technology was beyond them, they're just some dumb Egyptians. So, and so it's either white man did it or aliens did it. They don't want to come right out and say, white man did it, because obviously white man didn't exist in Egypt. So their catch-all is aliens did it. It's like,
Yeah,
it's like, no, I mean, a lot of the quote technology, I mean, yeah, we have an idea of how the pyramids were built. I haven't kept up on things, so I don't know where we stand as far. Do we actually know how they were built, or are we
oh,
still
oh,
hypothesizing?
they within the past 10 years, they have found, like, it's not quite the diary, but it's pretty close to a diary of the chief architect of one of the pyramids.
Oh, oh, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's been translated fairly recently, so it's surfaced in the news. But yeah, no, this guy, everything, yeah, we built barges, we moved pyramid rock, we moved the rocks from this quarry, we bring them down. They
Oh, oh.
found, um, they also found, like, the business records of whoever was in charge of building the pyramids, the
Mm-hmm.
project supervisor. So they know what they paid the people. They know that they lived in free government housing. They
Yeah,
had
I knew
free
that part.
government health care.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it amazes me though. Is like you look at something like the Pistis Sophia, or any of the Nag Hammadi, or the from Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I know most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are um, different versions of books of the Bible, but there are some non-biblical, non-canonical texts
yeah,
in there as well. And it's like, if you look at them from a I don't want to say it, from a non-religious point of view, and not so,
anthropological.
yeah, anthropological, that's a good way of, if you look at it from then, it's like we've lost, but we've gained so much. I mean, where would we be if the church didn't suppress a lot of this information? And I think in some regards the church did. Obviously, I mean,
Yeah,
where would we be? Would we be 2,000 years ahead in our technology, or would we be worse off and had totally annihilated ourselves?
yeah,
So I think sometimes reading, and this is why, I mean, I don't do it as much as I did, um, but reading some of these older texts, it's like, it's kind of eye-opening, because it's like, wait a minute, we're going through that now.
yeah,
I mean, it's, yeah. But yeah, Pistis Sophia, I think one of the reasons, like, for me, that I haven't reread it is because it was kind of a drag when I read it the first time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's why I give you credit for going through these, like the one you did with Deb and now Pista Sophia. And I think it's something that's kind of needed. I mean, granted, you guys have a blast doing it, and I've listened to a few episodes, and some of your commentaries are well, they're spot on, but it's like, yeah. I mean, what would it have been like for us? Like, if we were back during that time period, would we be, think the same way they did, or we're looking at it 2,000 years after the fact? It's like, do you think there's stuff that we can take out of it today and put to use as far as maybe our thinking? That I know Pista Sophia is a little bit more towards the religious side, but
well, the one book I've read the most in my life is actually a religious text. It's not Christian text. It's the Odyssey by Homer.
My favorite book.
So that's, and there's been a lot of, usually like when my life turns to shit and I don't know what to do, that's what I grab and I just reread it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I took a class in Greek and Roman mythology, and my paper that I had to write for the class was, I wish I could remember it exactly. I know it's on my old computer, but I wrote it on the Odyssey. I wish I can remember what I wrote about now. It was like 10 years ago. But yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's what I try to do is I'll look back on an older text, read it. Some of it is like, so the translating from the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic into English sometimes is not exact, so you lose a lot in that regard. But it's like, what drugs was this dude taking?
Oh, well, yeah, like that one of the things that Deb and I read from the Apocrypha. The guy's going out in the middle of the field not eating, and then he's supposed to eat the flowers. That's somebody doing opium. That's what that is. Yeah. You're out in the middle of a field of flowers. You haven't eaten in a couple of days, and then you're supposed to eat the flowers. That's opium, or they're using flowers instead of mushrooms.
Yeah. Yeah. But so, what's your next plan after Pista Sophia?
Oh, that'll be. I think. I can't remember whichever they found first, the Nag Hammadi Library or the Dead Sea Scrolls. I forget which one they found first.
I think they found Nag Hammadi first.
I think that's it. The problem is that there's all these various websites that have the stuff, but they don't have all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the scholarship on what they do have is sometimes questionable.
Right.
Because some of them will have the stuff that Madame Blavatsky pulled out of her ass. And it's like, that's not an actual religious text. I know she says, oh, this is the revealed doctrine of when Christ was a boy. No, it's not. It's what, you went to Nepal, did some drugs, and wrote some books.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like with the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a lot of bias. I mean, from the Israeli antiquities. I mean, Zawihiwas, has done some really good things, but he has a bias.
Yeah.
I won't say that it's pro-Israel or pro-Judaism. I'm not quite sure how to term it, but there's kind of a bias there, and you kind of have to look past that to try to parse that out and try to approach it from at least as neutral as you possibly can be, because as atheists, obviously, we're going to bring our own bias into it when we read them.
Yeah.
And, trying to get rid of that is the hardest thing. But.
And I was looking because I wanted to see if there was a great courses on the Odyssey, but it doesn't look like there is. Maybe I just haven't hit it yet. But there is. And I have that. I just haven't listened to it. But I found out that there's a translation of the Odyssey that's narrated by Sir Ian McKellen.
Oh, and it is absolutely fucking wonderful.
I bet it is if it's Sir Ian
It is.
McKellen.
Yes, I'm trying to think. I think he read the Pope translation. It's on
It,
my old computer, but when I was taking the class, I had difficulty reading it. So I looked for audio and I found a couple different ones and I came across the Ian McKellen one and it's marvelous. I mean, he does such a wonderful job with it, and he gives obviously different voices to the different characters. It's well worth the listen.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and that's part of the problem too. When you're translating from Greek into English, you lose some of that, and I think the Pope translation is actually considered one of the better ones.
Well, there's a woman who just did a translation that everybody is raving about.
Mm,
Emily Wilson is her name.
mm.
Um,
I'll have to look that one up.
yeah, but there's I don't remember if it's the Fagles translation or the Fitzgerald translation. I think it's the Fitzgerald translation is the one that I have. Um, but one of the things that he does is he taught somebody pulls out their sword and he calls it a steel sword, which is an anachronism because they didn't still the Bronze Age or the early Iron Age. But the reason why he did that was because there's no way we would understand the term that they used back then if you translated it into modern. It wouldn't it wouldn't have the same connotations because when they're saying steel sword, they're meaning a high quality metal sword.
Right.
And in fact, now I wonder, and I may have, because there's a really weird bronze alloy called auriculum, and it's mentioned in Plato's Republic. I think it's the Republic, and whichever one he talks about Atlantis, and that's supposedly what the roofs of Atlantis were made out of.
Ah.
And it's this really incredible bronze, and it's red, apparently. And and how I found out about it was I was reading a thing, and they found a shipwreck, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's got auriculum on it, the ingots," and and I'm like, "What?" And never heard of it. So and I, having worked in a foundry and been a machinist, I was really interested in what the metal composition was, and
Yeah.
I found out what it is, and it actually wouldn't be that hard to make. Since I do have a foundry, I just never have had the time to get all the necessary materials together to try and make some, because it'd be neat to see what it was like.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, I catch myself watching on YouTube like when I can't find something I want to watch, like I'll watch some of the home metalsmiths that have
Yeah,
their little foundries and they try to recreate different swords from the past and stuff like that. It's really interesting, and I think like looking back at something like where Plato talks about it, I think it is the Republic about Atlantis and stuff. Like the auriculum. It's like it kind of piques your interest to find out what the hell they're talking about.
yeah, yeah,
Because something like that really wouldn't. Yeah, it's bronze, but not bronze. It doesn't really translate into English, and I think that when we're reading the older texts like that in English, obviously, I mean, I know some people that can read the original Greek, well, Greek translations,
yeah.
depending on whether it's Koine Greek or versus modern Greek, they're not really relatable, but it's like, okay, how does that word translate? And then you have to kind of backtrack to find out what they're actually talking about for it to make sense.
Yeah, well, it's like there's a book I've read on the Civil War called Army Life in a Black Regiment, by Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and you've never heard of him, but he's had a big influence on American culture because he what was it? Emily Dickinson, the poet who never came out of her closet, whatever. She just lived in her father's house her entire life, never left the yard. I think it was Emily Dickens.
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, well, he was the editor, and he was the guy that got her work published. And during the Civil War, he led one of the units of escaped slaves. In fact, it was the first unit. It's not what they did the movie Glory based on, because he never really saw a lot of action. But or at least he never described seeing a lot of action. But he must have seen some action because he was wounded in combat and had to, for health reasons, had to leave the war. But also, he talks about the unit chaplain, he said he was the fiercest fighter he had ever seen in his life. That the chaplain, fought right alongside the other soldiers and everything. And I was reading it, and I was rereading it, I should say, and I noticed that he mentions the name of the particular rifle that the chaplain used, and that's the only rifle he names. You don't know if the guy's had a Colt or a Remington or whatever, but he names the rifle, and I'm like, well, that must mean something. And so I start poking around, and I figure out that, the chaplain went out and bought his own rifle, and it was one of the early repeating rifles of the time period. So, it would be, he while everybody else was still using a muzzle loader, he had one that was more like you think of in the Western era, where you stick bullets in it and then you just pull the trigger. You don't have to tamp the powder down and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes, like, I'll read an older text or an older book or whatever, and I'll be like, something will. I end up going down rabbit holes because I gotta figure out what they're actually talking about. And I think that's what's interesting about reading some of the older stuff, is it makes you, when you don't know something and you want to know, and you have to go look it up, and you just hope somebody's written something about it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when you're dealing with religious stuff, you run into all the alien crap.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, like, one of my biggest issue with the whole, like, ancient alien thing is it's a very racist doctrine, which ties into the Nephilim. And if you take the Nephilim doctrine down to its root, it's the serpent seed doctrine, which is the basis for a lot of your KKK, your white Aryans. It's the root doctrine of their creed. I mean, basically, Satan fucked Eve, and you have Cain, who is the seed of Satan, and Abel, who is the seed of Adam, and then it diverges from there, and then you get into the curse of Ham and all that. I mean, that's why I always like the modern day version of what we know as the KKK may say, "Oh, we're not a religious group," but if you go back to the original inception, it was.
Well, you only have to go back to the 1920s, and it was.
Yeah, and a lot of their beliefs are based in the serpent seed doctrine, which was very popular from the end of the Civil War on up, well, in some cases still today.
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember when I first came across, I first started getting this inkling, and then I did some more digging, and I was like, oh shit, I'm not the only one who has noted this. There were some other authors that brought it out even more so, and the flack they took for it was like, but they stood by, and from my perspective, looking into the research, I can see where they got this idea from. But there was one writer I came across, who, new agey type person, and she wrote a trilogy based within the Nephilim ideology, and it was like, I bought the 3 books. I think it was when I still was using my Kindle, and I'm reading through this, and I'm like, holy fuck. I mean, it was like so, lack of no better word. I mean, it was very racist. Well, then I had the chance on my old platform to have her as a guest on my show. And I'm like, okay, I did a little background research, and turns out that she was mulatto. And I'm thinking, how in the world could you embrace the serpent seed doctrine when you are a person of color? Well, she didn't consider herself a person of color, and it just got really bizarre. But I've interviewed other authors who embrace the whole Nephilim ideology, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not racist," and I was like, "Yeah, you are," because I mean, so, some of the words he used in his presentation were very telling.
Yeah.
And once you ripped it down, ripped it apart, it was like, yeah, that's a racist doctrine. That's a, he was using like kinsman redeemer, which in the white supremacist movement is very racist. And he was like using, like, I listened to prior interviews to do some background. And I was like, holy fuck. So I brought it, this was on my old platform, and I had brought it up to my producer, and I said, I don't think I can have this guy on. And he's like, well, why? So I laid everything out, and he's like, I guess he and his wife were friends with this guy.
Ooh.
Went to him. I didn't know about this. And all of a sudden, there's this Facebook post from the guy I'm supposed to have on saying, I am not a fucking racist, blah, blah. So I had him on. I let him hang himself. And you could tell he changed his whole, because when you interview an author, they have, basically a script that they follow to plug their book, to get out the important points of their book. And a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of your authors will send you pre-approved questions that you should ask. Well, I had all my own. And I think I got maybe 2 in that he would not answer. So I sat on it for months and months and months. He kind of cleaned up his Facebook, and then President Obama was running for re-election. And out came the racist card faster than fast. And I'm like, I took a huge screenshot and sent it to my producer and said, you might want to check your friends list. And he's like, holy fuck. It's like, this is what's happening. Not everybody that embraces the Nephilim doctrine or believe in Nephilim are racist, but it's very, very, I mean, I have yet to meet somebody who says, oh, I believe in the Nephilim and the Nephilim giants, that doesn't fall for the us versus them mentality that's implanted in, that's like key to the Nephilim doctrine, especially those that are into the spiritual warfare bullshit of Ephesians that we're seeing today, or they fall for, I won't say they're full blown, but they have racist tendencies. I have yet to meet somebody that doesn't fall into that category. And it's like, when I brought it up to my producer a couple months after the fact, he was like, oh, fuck. I was like, I told you, but you didn't believe me. And from what I understand, I don't follow this guy anymore because he got his wish when he made it onto the TV show Ancient Aliens, because it was so blatantly obvious that's what he was working towards. I mean, everything he did was geared towards getting on that show, and he finally eventually got on there. I was like, yeah, he got his wish. But, I mean, nice guy. I mean, he actually, from a theological standpoint, agrees with me on some things as far as like with homosexuality in the Bible and stuff like that. But I'm sorry, when you start adopting that type of doctrine, it's like, no. So I stopped following him. But it's like,
yeah.
And to the, like, for him and a couple other authors I've interviewed on my old platform, it's like they would rely on these ancient texts, but they twist them to their own interpretation, and there's really no way of saying that they're wrong or right
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because we weren't there.
Yeah. Speaking of the whole racism thing in Von Daniken, it never hit me because I read one of his books when I was a kid. Maybe I read two of them. I don't remember. But one of them, I remember him talking about, you know, quoting from the Book of Mormon and saying, well, they came over to the submarines, and obviously it was aliens that built the submarines. And at the time, I didn't know anything about Mormonism, and I didn't know, there wasn't the discussion that the ancient alien guys were all pretty much racist. So I never made the connection until fairly recently. Oh, that's why Donikin liked Mormonism, and this book would have been written back at the time when Mormonism still ostracized people of color.
Yeah, so he wrote Chariots of the God, I believe, in 1972. So it would have been around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and the funny thing, like, I know with my research when I was researching the Nephilim, it's like, I didn't want to, because I knew some of the people who were espousing the whole Nephilim thing. But I'm like, these people, outwardly, at least, from what I could see, did not really espouse racism. And I'm not just talking against, black people in general, all people of color.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't until, when President Obama was elected the first time and the second time, obviously, that it really started coming to the fore. And it's like these people that, some people I've known for 10, 15 years, and I'm like, holy fuck. And, because I did a lot of author interviews, I would listen to a lot of their previous interviews on other platforms. And I mean, I used to write out transcripts and then rip the transcripts apart. And, I'd re-listen to the same podcast like 5-6 times. I mean, my old job, I used to be able, I'd hide my MP3 player in my hat and run a earplug into my ear, and for a 10-hour shift, that's all I do would be listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's really funny what people, let out, thinking that people won't realize what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think being able to look back on something, like the Pistis Sophia, like, Instructions to Shirapok, the Nag Hammadi Library, Qumran. I mean, we can look back and see what they thought 2,000 years ago and actually know what they thought because they wrote it down. But then to have someone say, well, I got this revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That this is what this means. It's like, no, that's not what it says.
Yeah. Well, and like there's even debate about things that are commonly accepted, like to go back to the Odyssey. There's debate that the Trojan horse may have actually been a colloquialism for a ship.
I can see that,
and that makes some sense. And then there's supposedly in Aramaic, the the whole thing. If your your eye offends thee, pluck it out. That's a colloquialism and is not meant to be interpreted literally. Same with cut your hand off rather than sin or things like that. They're colloquialisms, and the actual meanings behind the colloquialisms have been lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I'm trying to think what I think I want to say Shakespeare. A lot of what, like, most people don't know, like in I can't remember which play it was where he says, I bite my thumbnail at thee. And most people don't know it means the same thing as this, giving him a middle finger.
Yeah.
So I used to get in trouble all the time because I give the finger to everybody. So I started biting my thumbnail at people, and nobody knew what I was. I was like, go read Shakespeare, you'll figure it out. And I mean, that was years ago. It's like, and I would tell, you know, like even when you put your just like this, I mean, it's like people don't realize you're basically saying fuck you. Or over in Europe, well, I don't know if this is true, it's just something that was related to me, is that we find belching after a meal kind of, you know, off-putting, where over in Europe or early Europe, there was like a compliment.
Yeah. Well,
So what we do here could be like totally off-putting to someone of another culture.
Yeah, there was I had an anthropology professor who told me about a colleague of hers who nearly died because he didn't recognize the signals, the gestures that the person he was talking with, you know, what they were, because he was dehydrated and he, you know, was lost, and he found this woman from a tribe. He knew her language, and so he says, "Can you take me to where some water is?" And she did this. And, you know, he's like, where's the water? And eventually he remembered, oh yeah, in that tribe, the women are not allowed to point. So they gesture with their lips. So she was using her lips to point in the direction. And it's like, and so, you know, there's all kinds of fiddly things like that which get lost over the years. There was something I was reading about not too long ago where they pieced together this thing, and they're like, oh, wow, this really changes our interpretation of this piece of literature from that particular time period. But I can't remember what it was. But it was like, oh, yeah, we figured out that they did this and that. And it's like, well, it was totally different than what we had thought. And there was, and I guess up until the 11th, 12th century, clean-shaven images of Christ were common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember hearing something about that. What I find funny, like, generally when I pick an audiobook for, like, when I'm trying to fall asleep and stuff, I don't, you know, I just pick whatever pops up that seems to be a good length. Like, I don't want something over 3 hours or I'll never get to fucking sleep because, you know, if it gets interesting, I start listening and then I don't want to fall asleep. So there were a couple books that they had made audio that were actually by old-time missionaries. And it's funny to listen. Like, there was one, I believe I'm not sure what part of Africa they were in. I want to say Nigeria, but I could be wrong. But they were over in Africa, one of the countries over in Africa, and, you know, granted, this was written in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, it was under fair use, so it was quite old. And it was just funny to hear how they considered these people, quote, savages.
Yeah.
Just because it didn't fit their concept of, you know, their culture. It's like, no, this is their culture and your culture is totally separate. You can't put your culture onto theirs. Because, you know, it's just like with the missionary that was killed in Senegalese. I mean, he knew going there was illegal. He went there anyways and ended up losing his life because the Senegalese didn't want anything to do with him and killed him.
Well, and not only that, I found a couple of news articles that said, oh, yeah, the tribe's not as isolated as it's made out to be. They actually, there's other tribes in the area that they trade with and things like that. And I even found, I had a hard drive crash and I lost the link to the blog site, but there's a blog that's dedicated to, you know, photographs of, you know, various hunter-gatherer societies.
Mm-hmm.
And they have photos of the Sentinelese taken on the island by the photographer. I mean, it's not a telephoto lens doing a long shot, because you can see, like the reflection of the camera in the eyes of the person he's photographing. He's standing on the beach on the island with him, and and it says these are the Sentinelese, blah blah blah. They tend to kill outsiders, and it took this guy like years to gain their trust, and he did it by hanging around the other tribes in the area, and interacting with them, and then he got on the island that way to take the pictures, and they're like the only pictures on the island that have been taken. All the rest have been telephoto shots and things like that.
Well, I know, I remember reading one article, because we did an episode basically about white saviorism with missionaries going to other countries. Oh, we're going to save them, literally, not figuratively. And what the article was is that was one particular tribe. There were other tribes on the island or islands, and some were more open to outsiders than others were. So, but this particular tribe that he had the run-in with, where they were, this was part of the island that was basically verboten, and he knew that. But it's just like I know.
Well, and there was after the thing, there was an article. There was an Indian researcher who she did her anthropology work on that island with those people, and she had photographs, but she hadn't had any contact with them since like '94.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just like one of the. It was kind of a meme-ish type thing, little story with it, but this was like about a year or two ago, about a woman who was a Christian missionary and went over to Africa expecting to save the savages, and she gets over there and she's like, they're more fucking modern than we are.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe if you do a little reading about these people before you go, you'll realize that, various cultural groups are where they want to be.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a documentary I watched about a week ago where this gentleman and his family are basically between two worlds, the world of the nomad in the sub-Saharan, in the desert area, and he knows that he can't survive the full year where he's at, and say every 6 months, I don't remember the exact time period, he sends his children and his wife back to the quote city, because but he's not he himself is not happy there, where his heart is at, where living in the desert as a nomad.
Well, and a lot of them, the reason they're living like they're living is because they don't have any money. I mean, one of the things that they're doing in Africa now, thanks to cell phones, is they're giving them solar powered lights, which they love, and they're also they're selling them solar panels, and those people are using it to make money because they're charging everybody's cell phone. They're charging lights. They're making money that way, and they're building up their society while still maintaining a lot of their traditions.
Yeah,
there were 5 brothers in Brazil. I think their last name was something like Cortez, but all 5 of them their job was to protect the uncontacted tribes and the various tribes living in the jungles down in the Amazon. And what they did with a lot of, because they, as Western society encroached on those areas, the tribes were either pushed back, or if they tried to integrate into the society, they had problems. Mm-hmm. And so this guy got this vast area of the rainforest set aside as a reservation for them. And they, and he sets everything. The way the reservation is set up is that, you know, they can build whatever housing they want, but there's all kinds of modern stuff there as well. Nobody, you know, from the government says you got to learn how to drive a tractor. The tractor's there. If they want to learn how to drive it, they drive it. And he goes and, you know, the tribes that are in danger of being wiped out, he makes contact with them. And there's a documentary I saw on YouTube. It's called The Tribe That Hides from Man, I think, that talks about, you know, that follows him around when he's doing this. And, you know, he contacts them, and he said, you know, he explained to him, look, they're going to burn your jungle. You're going to have to get out of here. He says, we can take you to a place where you'll be safe. And so if he gets the tribe to come, they bring, you know, all their possessions to the reservation, and he has all the other tribes in the reservation there to greet him. So they, you know, they feel somewhat safe because it's people who look like them, not Western dressed people. And, you know, he said, you know, they're given an area, and they say, you live your life how you want. The only thing you cannot do is have warfare with any of the other tribes.
Right.
And, you know, that seems to be the most successful way of bringing them into modern society, if you can't protect the environment where they live in.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on tonight, well, not just tonight, but any night, but is that because of your interest in the quote older texts and in the cultural and the sociological aspects and stuff, it's kind of interesting to see that perspective, because I think a lot of that is lost on a lot of people. Not that we don't have enough to keep up on, but some people aren't aware that, you know, this kind of stuff is part of what we do. I mean, for some of us more so than others. I mean, you can be an activist for you know, for indigenous tribes. You can be an activist for, you know, like what they're doing down in South America and the Amazon. But not everybody is even aware of that.
Yeah.
And because of your, shall we say, unusual interest in the older texts, I mean, some of us are just fucking nerds. I think we lose that, and it's nice to hear somebody say, well, you know, I watched this, or I read this, or yada yada. And I think it kind of brings it full circle that, and this is something that, you know, we all have different interests. My interest happens to lie, you know, primarily with dominionism. And
Gee, why would you be interested in dominionism?
Well, yeah, I'm a little more so than some people, but or the whole, you know, I spent 7 years researching the whole bullshit surrounding the Nephilim, and you know, that all, well, it started out from the paranormal aspect because I was still involved with that. But I started seeing tie-ins with dominionism, and like, you know, we had that whole spat of Noah movies, and all that, it actually is tied together. And I think it's on that computer, but there was actually a tie-in to the dominionist movement, and now we're kind of more hitting theocracy than dominionism, but it's basically the same thing. And it's like, you know, I took an interest in that, whereas Deb was interested in, you know, the bullshit surrounding Islam, and Morgan has her interest in, you know, well, she's studied law and still waiting for certification, I believe, but she's a lawyer, so obviously her interests are going to lie with, you know, First Amendment stuff, and water rights is where she's heading. But I mean, that we all have a place in what interests us that we can push forward.
Yeah, I mean, I got interested in the old text because, well, part of it was I had read Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and then there used to be a great catalog, and I hate to say great because some of the books they sold, but you know, this is a pre-internet day, so you finding obscure stuff was hard.
Yeah.
But they used to sell all these really obscure books. It's where I discovered a lot of Robert Anton Wilson's writings. It's where, and they had the paramilitary. One catalog had paramilitary stuff, had all kinds of psychedelic drug stuff, had various controversial sex books, had some counterculture novels, and it also had this religious section that was on controversial religious texts and things like that. And that's where I saw Bible myths and their parallels in other religions. And I was reading the blurb about that, and I says, wow, that sounds real interesting, because I'd already read the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and I was like, this sounds like it's ties into that. It actually doesn't, but that's another story. So and I got it, and I read the thing, and I was in my early 20s, and I barely got through it, and I barely remembered it. And then so when I was decided to do the podcast, I was like, I gotta find, I don't want to do like news every week, because that's a lot of work. I want, where I can have a week where I got to do some work, and a week where I can kind of slide on through. Mm-hmm. And I remembered that book, and I'm like, nobody is reading something like that. You got people reading the Bible, you got people reading the Book of Mormon, you got the Quran, but you don't have this particular thing. And so I was like, let me do that. And so, that took me 2.5 years to get through. But I was glad, because in the years since, I had read Joseph Campbell's stuff, and I had realized, and when I was rereading it, I realized, oh, this is basic. This is, Campbell's take on everything was from a literary perspective. This is from like a cultural, anthropological kind of perspective. And he figured out things that Joseph Campbell never did. Mm-hmm. They overlapped a lot, but you'd still learn more about a lot of things reading this than you would Campbell, because I read The Hero, one of these things was The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Right. Well, on that, Campbell, because he's trying to give you the story elements, he says, I'm quoting from non-Western myths, because if I quote from Western myths, you won't make the connections. Whereas Bible myths and their parallel in other religions, it's centered around books in the Bible, and then it pulls, other myths in that match up to it. So you do get the same information out of it that you do from Campbell in that aspect, but it's just presented in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm tripping over my words. I think that's what's so interesting, is that, like you said, we have people reading the Bible, we have people reading the Quran, yada, yada, yada. But so far, as far as I know, other than non-specifically atheist podcasts that are more coming from an academic standpoint, like God, History of the Gaps, nobody's really reading the ancient texts, and that's what I think drew me to as I said, I'm woefully behind, but I think that's what makes it unique. And because as a layman, because a lot of the podcasts I do listen to are from academic, History of Gaps, he's a professor, but it's still really interesting to me. But I like when it was at the kitty.
Yeah, that's Fuzznuts. He's upset. He can't be in my lap. Let me move, and so he can get up here. Finds the bookshelf.
But I think it's interesting, hearing from, like, as a layman reads it and your reactions to it.
Yeah.
So it just kind of gives it a different spin.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of things where it's just like, I kind of wish I knew somebody who was an expert on this stuff, because it don't make no sense. but I haven't. Well, I got Robert Price on once, and I haven't asked him back because, well, his politics have gone off the deep end in the years since. So,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
had him all lined up for an interview, and then he came out with that, and I'm like, oh, fuck. It's like, yeah.
I mean, he knows his biblical stuff because I used to listen to the Bible Geek podcast.
I still do. I catch myself doing because he's very interesting, but it's like, oh, so.
Yeah, but he starts getting into politics, and he kind of got political when he was with me, but I just let it slide. I didn't, because it was a minor thing, and he may have been right. I don't know. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
But I've tried to get Bart Ehrman on because I really want to get, because he loves saying, well, this book of the New Testament is fake because nobody would write, you can tell it's me because I make my X this way. Okay, that's verisimilitude, to give the false impression that it's legitimate. But when you ask him, do you think Jesus was real? And he's like, oh, of course. Paul talks about knowing Jesus's brothers. How do you know that isn't verisimilitude as well?
Yeah.
And but
yeah, he's. I mean, I like his contributions, but it's like,
well, what got me about him, and it really put me to questioning the stance of the people who say, oh no, there actually was a Jesus, is, wow, what was the podcast? Like Reasonable Doubts, I think was it. They've since quit doing it, but last I checked, the episodes were still up. But he was on there, and he was promoting his latest book, and he was talking about how he thought the resurrection scene, when they roll back and they find the tomb empty, he thought, well, that's it. We know this part of Mark or whichever book it's in was added later on, so I want to go and see what it would have actually, research the subject and find out that what actually happened after a crucifixion. And he goes, that's when I found out that it could, not only was the scene of the stone being rolled away wrong. He goes, but none of that could have happened because the Romans didn't allow you to bury the body of the people who had been crucified. And it's like, yeah, so you're starting from the wrong premise. The premise that you start from is that these books are an accurate retelling of events which happened. You should be starting from the premise that all of this is fiction and then seek to prove the elements of it.
Yeah. Well, I think part of, and this is just my take on Bart. I've been following him for years, and it's like he may be an agnostic, but he's not a very strong one. But it's like, I know, I mean, it took me 10 years to get rid of all that bullshit out of my life.
Yeah, no.
When I deconverted, I went through, 3 or 4 years of being an agnostic. I tried to hold on to it, and then the more reading and research, for lack of a better word, I did, the more it was like, no, this just does not make any sense. And then there was another, it was another 6, 7 years before I finally even admitted to myself I was an atheist. So I can see, because he started out as a believer.
Yeah.
And, I would say he's kind of a weak to middling agnostic. Now, he seems to say now that he's, more agnostic than anything, but just from my personal opinion, hearing some of the YouTube videos and stuff where he's giving lectures and stuff, it doesn't seem to be very strong. But that's just my personal opinion, because I've been there. I mean, and the thing is, like, for me, this was all pre-internet. I had none of the resources that people have now to read different, articles and papers and books and yada yada yada. It's like I used to jokingly say with Deb, if God Delusion would have came out when I first started deconverting, I probably would have done it overnight because that book, love or hate Dawkins or love or hate the book, it just put into words everything that I was going through, and it was just like all I needed was that one bitch slap but it took me 10 freaking years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was, I stopped being religious when I was 17 because I was sitting there in church one day and I was having a few doubts, and they just happened to be reading from the Sermon on the Mount. And, Jesus comes out and condemns divorce. And my girlfriend at the time, her parents were going through a divorce, and they were very, her father was very abusive. And I'm like, there is no way you can reason with her father and get him to be a decent man and stop being her and her mother. So they're better off being divorced. Why are why would you condemn this person to that kind of life? And my own parents, my mother was in an abusive marriage and they had been divorced at this point. And I was like, I'm better off because my parents are divorced. Why, why would you condemn them to hell? And then the next thing they read was if you look at a woman with lust in your eye, that's the same as infidelity, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, whoever wrote that doesn't understand anything about biology. Because if we didn't have that kind of drive, we wouldn't reproduce. And I'm like, and my church doesn't have a problem with people being divorced. And this is not something said by somebody like Paul or one of the disciples. This is coming straight from the horse's mouth. So if we're not buying that crap, and he's saying stuff that we know is biologically, implausible, that you have to have sexual desire drives and things like that, I said, then this whole thing is garbage. But I didn't really start calling myself an atheist. I mean, because at the time, this is late 80s. There's no internet and all of that. There was still the common thing that, well, atheism is just the religion of no religion, blah, blah, blah. So I would call myself a religious if I said anything like that. Or I would, I would say, well, my beliefs are that I'm not supposed to talk about them. So it implied that I was like a Quaker or something. And then, as I got older, I stopped. I was less and less, concealing it. I just would avoid the topic altogether. Then 9/11 happened, and I was like, I'm going to start calling myself an atheist because I kept seeing all these people who were, who were atheists and were saying that Islam is worse than any other religion, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, everything you see in Islam that's doing the stuff we see today is the same as the other religions, and you're only saying this because it's brown people that you associate with Islam. I mean, they're like, well, you don't see Christians killing each other. It's like, dude, the fucking troubles in Northern Ireland were, just
I was gonna say
a few years ago, and there's still, I guess every now and then somebody still gets killed in that shit.
Well, it's like I had a friend who was from Ireland and was kind of in between.
Yeah.
Didn't really side with the one side or the other. She basically just, and she point blank told me she person that's Catholic or Protestant, what the hell they're fighting over, they wouldn't be able to tell you because it's been going on so long that they don't even know what they're fighting about anymore. Now, some do. I mean, she wasn't trying to do it, but that's the thing. I mean, like for me, my whole issue was with doctrinal differences. I was raised Lutheran. I went to a Wesleyan Methodist college. Don't ask why. And then I ended up actually converting to, I left Lutheranism and I became Pentecostal charismatic, which you factor in my history, that's not unusual because I have bipolar disorder and I have a tendency, I have bipolar 1 with psychotic tendencies. In other words, I used to get delusions. So yeah, being, thinking I could speak in tongues and interpret and all this other bullshit would fall right in line with that. But it's like, I never, you know, I used to say, like when people would say, "Oh, Islam's so bad," it's like, no, Islam's right where Christianity was back during the Dark
Yeah,
Ages.
and it's where.
They're just going through it at a different phase, and it's like, to me, I have friends that are Muslim. I have friends who converted from Christianity to Islam. I don't understand why. And this all the time. I don't understand how you Islam.
Yeah.
And she swears up and down that it had nothing to do with her husband because her husband is Muslim. But she said it really didn't have anything to do with it. Now she's not a very strong one, you know, she just identifies basically. But it's like it made no. But we don't. Very rare do we talk about it. I mean, it's just not something that's. But I have people, or have had. I don't have them so much now, but that would get in my face about the religion, especially being that I'm being a lesbian and so I'm like, I just want they're not part of my life anymore because I'm sorry, don't shove it down my fucking throat. I
Um,
don't shove being gay down your throat, so don't shove Jesus down my throat.
um, Talking about going to Wesleyan, my stepbrother, right, grew up. Well, he started out Methodist, I think, and then when my dad married his mom, they went to the Lutheran church, and he went to Emory for his undergrad, and then his master's and his doctorate. He got those at Princeton, and he taught for years at Wartburg College in Iowa, which is a Lutheran college. And now he's teaching at Hanover College, or he's the president of Hanover College in Indiana, which is Presbyterian. And I asked him if he'd converted to Presbyterianism. He goes, "No, they just pay better." But
um,
I think he's, based on some of the conversations he and I have had over the years, I think he's somebody who is a cultural Christian now.
yeah,
And he, because I mean, he's got divinity degrees, so he's pretty much useless outside of academia, and it's easier to get a job at a religious college with a divinity type degree than it is at a secular college.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
and that's the thing. I mean, it's like I was originally going to school to become a minister. It's like, okay, now what do I do with what I never finished. I changed my major to psychology and I still kept my Bible and theology minor, but I never graduated. And it's like, okay, I have all this shit. Now what do I do with it? So I found a good use for it.
yeah, yeah. I was an English and psychology major in college, so
Yeah.
and
It's well, and that would probably explain your interest in Pista Sophia
yeah,
and at L. And I think that's important. I mean, the more we read, you know, how things developed, I think, the better off we are. I mean, I'm constantly, I read probably a book a week, and that's not including what I read online. But my sole entertainment is online. And
yeah,
it's just because I don't have TV. I use YouTube. If I want to watch something, I watch it on YouTube. I used to have Netflix years ago, but I can't afford it right now. But my TV is YouTube. I
yeah.
mean, for me to pay for cable would be dumb because I watch maybe 2 hours a night, if that.
Yeah.
Half the time I fall asleep within the first 20 minutes, so I find something that's only an hour. So I'm not up half the night.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm pretty much the same way. I mean, I don't have cable. I just have internet, and I mean, I've got Netflix and Hulu, but I hardly watch those. The reason I have those mostly is because I got my mother a Roku.
Right.
She's she's almost 90 years old, and she doesn't have cable, and it's like, well, this gives her something. She can watch all kinds of different stuff with the Roku that
Mm-hmm.
she couldn't otherwise watch, and the cost is modest, so it's no big deal. And you know, she's got two Rokus. The one has because one you can't have as many channels as the other, but one's got like 140 channels, and the other one's got like 300 channels on it. So, you
Well,
know,
yeah, I had satellite TV, not Dish, Direct TV for a while, and it's like I found myself watching the same four channels over, and I'm like, why am I paying $100 a month to watch four fucking channels?
yeah,
And when I moved back to Pennsylvania, I didn't have the funds to have internet put in. And my first apartment that I had by myself, I would have had to have the entire line put in.
yeah,
So it would have cost total cost would have been 560 for install, just to have the line. And it was like, no, I'm not paying that amount of money for four stations because I knew I'd watch Food Network, um, Rachel Maddow,
yeah,
Anderson Cooper, and I would watch like TLC when they actually had a documentary type, and it was just like I'll just watch that shit on. I'll watch old ones that I haven't
yeah,
watched yet.
yeah.
Although I
Well,
am slowly running out of things to watch because I have it on almost every day. So
yeah. Well, that's that. Like for years, I didn't have. I had internet, and I didn't have a Roku or anything like that. So I was just, I was pirating stuff and doing it that way. And then I had a roommate move in, and we got Netflix, and I was like, wow, this is pretty handy.
yeah,
Um,
I did like Netflix, especially. I'm a documentary type nerd, so I don't really watch. I mean, anytime I get into any type of TV show types, every week thing, it's like my schedule always changes like halfway through, so then I miss the rest of it. And it's like, so. I mean, the only show I used to watch religiously was Law and Order, all of them, but primarily SVU because I had the hots for Mariska Hargitay, so I had to get my fix every week. But then my schedule changed, and it was like, so I was always so far behind on TV. I just never. The only thing I'm may try to figure out how to get is the new Star Trek with Picard.
oh yeah,
I got to
that
figure out how to get that on my computer. So,
well, that'll be on CBS All Access, which is like $6 a month.
well, I don't know if I could afford that or not. I'll have to figure something out.
Well, yeah, which you could do, because this is what I did when I took that month off. Is I got it for you get a 7-day free trial. Well, so I binged the 2 seasons of Discovery, and then unsubscribed. Of course, when next season rolls around, I won't get those that first 7 free days. I'll have to actually pony up some money, but you
Yeah.
know that won't be so bad. I don't know if I'll wait till the whole season is completed and then sign up and get it and watch it, or if I'll just watch them each week as they come out. Have you seen any of the Discovery?
I haven't watched any Star Trek since the end of Next Generation because I gave up TV by then.
Oh,
I haven't had TV in 7 years.
yeah. The Discovery, it's not. They're still. They haven't quite hit the Star Trek knob on full, but I will say from a storyline and everything, it is the strongest start of any Star Trek since the original.
That's cool. Well, see, I mean, like the way I'm really partial to anything Dune. Gee, I wonder why. And I've always been, I mean, I religiously reread the original 6 probably every 2 years. Now I have it on audio so I can listen to it whenever. And I have almost the entire series on audio now, which is really cool because I can listen to it. And the version I have, they have different characters. It's not just one person reading the book. So it gives it a little more of a real feel to it. So, yeah, if you can find
I don't know if you seen the you have to rent it or buy it. You can't, it's not like on a streaming service. Although, yeah, somebody may have put it on YouTube or what's Daily Motion. That's another good site for stuff that's, you may not be able to find without paying for it. It's called Jabberwocky. I think that's the guy's name. Dune. It's about this guy who in the 70s was going to do a Dune movie.
Yeah.
And he had all these people lined up. Salvador Dali was going to play. Mm-hmm. And it's all behind the scenes on that. That's kind of interesting, but it's watching it, you're not like, oh, okay, this really would have been a great film. You're like, okay, this could have been interesting, but you just don't. There's not enough there to give you the whole thing. And speaking of Dune, have you seen the? I gotta find it so I can get the quote right. There it is. Where they've taken the photo of Patrick Stewart from Dune and photoshopped Patrick Stewart from TNG onto him, and he's saying the Earl Grey extends life, the Earl Grey expands consciousness, the Earl Grey is vital to space travel.
Oh no, I haven't seen that one. I'll have to look for it. But yeah, well, the problem with the Dune movies, I mean, I enjoy them, but it's like I know like the first attempt, like 84 when Lynch did it, it's like, okay, they tried to take all 3 books and cram it into one freaking movie. It took me like 16 hours to read all 3 books in one sitting. It's like you can't take 16 hours of material and cram it into a 3-hour movie and think it's
no.
And that's the problem. Like, I know Sci-Fi Channel for a while, they had a mini-series type, and they broke the movies up into like 3 parts and did the entire book. Book 1, then I think they got as far as book 2, and then they stopped. And that's the problem I run into it with any Dune movie. I have all 4 versions of the Dune movie on my old computer. I should put them on this one before that one dies. And it's like, they all have good points, but then it's like they all have like some really. It's like you're trying to cram too much into one movie, and it's not making. If you hadn't read the book,
yeah,
and I've read the book. Well, I've had them since 1982, and I've read them at least 10 times minimum. And there's still parts that, even from reading them, that I still pick out now that I missed, the last time I read it. Yeah. So you can't cram that much. I mean, then you got, with his son taking over with Steven Anderson and writing the prequels, it's a different writing style and totally different, but, some critics are like, oh, they're terrible. It's like, no, not really. But they're going from his notes.
Yeah.
It's not the same writer, but it's just like, just with any type of literature, going back to, like Pistis Sophia and stuff, you have to take into account the culture of the time. I mean, when Frank Herbert originally wrote Dune, you're talking almost 50 years ago now.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, So it's like, yeah, I mean, if you read some of the old science fiction, like Andre Norton from the 30s and 40s and 50s, I mean, their work changed, through the course, as technology changed. I mean, now they're talking that the, transporter from Star Trek might be a reality for non-living things in 10 years. It's
But,
like, yeah.
well, it's like there was they found an incomplete manuscript of a novel Robert Heinlein had worked on at some point, and they gave it to Spider Robinson, and they let Spider Robinson finish it. And I was all excited when I heard about this because, hey, Spider Robinson, big Heinlein fan, new Heinlein, probably do a really good job of it. And then somebody on a message board I was on was recounting, it was reading the book and going through and talking about it, not giving any real spoilers, but just, general details. And all of a sudden it's like, well, the book goes along and there's huge references to 9/11 in it. And I'm like, Heinlein never made any references in his stuff to anything that was contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
Rare occasions he'd make references to like World War II, maybe drop a line in about Vietnam, but that was about it. And apparently, like a whole swath of this book is consumed about stuff dealing with 9/11. And
No.
and the guy who was was describing the book is he's Jewish, and he's one of these people that Israel can do no wrong. I mean, he's he thinks that if Israel got nuked, the New York Times would put out a story that says, well, they deserved it. I mean, he's and there's certain things that he's just, he admits that he's irrational about. But even he was reading the stuff on 9/11 going, man, this is kind of racist and saying that, going a little far as to how the Muslims are.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like when the Foundation series from Isaac Asimov, there were a lot of spin-offs where they had other writers write about a storyline about a specific character. There's a whole anthology. I don't know where mine is at the moment. And it's just like, I mean, Asimov was more in the day as far as cultural happenings, but a lot of your sci-fi writers don't really make a specific commentary about specific happenings. Like you said, they might drop a line in about World War II, and I can understand that because that was a huge turning point in society. Same thing with Vietnam, but they would never wax eloquently about 9/11 because that was just all around, whatever your political stance on it is. I mean, and like even the older sci-fi from like the 20s and 30s, you would not find very much racism in it. So there were certain subjects they did not put in there. But I mean, that's why I would love to see someone take like Pistis Sophia or any of the other documents you've read and update them to today and see what they come out with. Because it's like, I know Pistis Sophia is not the easiest read in the world, but how can we take that and apply it to what we're going through now? Or is it even possible? Can we quote update it, so to speak?
Well, you could, and I mean, bear in mind the translation I'm reading is, like 1926, but I'm certain that a modern translation of it would do things a little differently and keep within the spirit of it. There was, I don't know if it was a Radio Lab podcast I listened to one time, but they had, it was some NPR related podcast, and they were talking about how to translate a poem from one language to another. And they had like 9 different translators working on it. and describing, well, this is what I picked, and you would find that, I mean, you really needed to read each translation because, as the translators explained, they picked certain things out and emphasized them over other things, whereas this other translator would do something different is what they picked out and emphasized. So that it was, it was like reading 9 different poems on the same subject.
Yeah. Well, and that, you apply that to biblical translations.
Yeah.
Why do you think we have over 3,000 different versions, one of which I love to bring up all the time, the Klingon version of the Bible? Because every translator has their particular, in some cases they do have an agenda. I mean, there's the net .net version, which is very conservative, but every version of the Bible has the bias of the translator or translators written within them. I mean, for the most part, most of them are very similar. But you get into some of the newer translations, like the Conservative Bible or the .net Bible, they're very, very conservative.
Yeah, well, and
their political views show in their translations.
Yeah, and there's one, and I don't remember which one it is, but I think it's one of the conservative ones where they're excising whole verses rather than translating them because it screws up their
narrative.
Yeah.
And that sentiment, like you said, like with basically you were reading 9 different poems.
Yeah.
I know we in one of my speech communication classes when I was my second time around in college, we had to do a personal reading of the poem Jabberwocky. And it was like to listen to the entire class do their reading of it. It was like, is that the same poem that I just read? It's like we all came up with different emphasis on different lines, even though it was a nonsensical poem. I mean, that was the whole point of the lesson, really, was, we all interpret things differently. And it applies to something as simple, well, I wouldn't call Pistis Sophia simple, but something as simple as Pistis Sophia to something like the Bible.
Yeah. Well, are you familiar with the Free Thought Prophet podcast?
Free Thought. Sounds familiar.
I was on there. Well, I had the one guy on there to help me read the Pistis Sophia when Skullbeard wasn't available. And on his show, one of the things that they're doing is I forget what version it is, but it's the version of the Bible where they have, each page is 4 columns. One column is the Gospel of Mark, one's Luke, one's
linear.
Yeah, and that's how he's going through the New Testament.
Yeah,
and he said that's really kind of strange and changes your perspective on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we did that in one of my Bible classes in college. We had all 4. We had a interlinear that we used to compare the stories. Although we were comparing them that they were all the same.
Yeah. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I remember I kind of sort of started doubting in college, but I wasn't. I was like, I do know, like in my apologetics class, I got kicked out twice because I was like, why do we need to do apologetics? It never made any sense to me because, I was taught in another class that the Bible's so easy a 5-year-old could read it. So I just thought apologetics was kind of, even back then, was kind of crazy. But yeah, somehow we've managed to blow through 2 hours. But I kind of figured it would be easy, and I knew we'd kind of slide a little bit off topic. But, that's the whole gist of the chatting with is, to find out what's going on new in your world and all that fun stuff. So please tell our listeners where they can find you.
If you type into the Googles Trailer Park Atheist, I'm pretty much the first hit. You can find my podcast on just about every podcast catcher except for the iHeartRadio one, because I haven't gone through the hassles of submitting it to them. They don't, unlike everybody else, they don't pull theirs from the iTunes feed. You have to formally submit yours and then drop in the link to the iTunes feed.
Yeah. I've heard some good and bad things about them. But right now, we're just on here until I can get all the technical crap figured out. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't feel bad, because Deb told me what her setup was. And I'm like, I can't figure any of this out.
Yeah, and nobody else can either. And regretfully, when she passed, so did the passwords.
Yeah.
I don't have access to Patreon. I don't have. So contemplating, depending on how, because for those that aren't aware, Google Hangouts is going bye-bye on August 1st. I am thinking at the moment of YouTube Live, but I have not tested it yet. So our first episode back will be, I believe, after the 1st, if I got my dates right. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm going to do some testing during the week to see, how much it's going to change, what it's going to do. And if we do go that route, there's a slight possibility there will be a real minor name change, just so I can reopen Patreon, get this back onto Stitcher and stuff like that. But it's work right now is being a bear. We're in our busy time for the summer, and we've been busier than we expected, which is good because it's like pre-recession.
Yeah.
Which is so it's nice to be busy, but it is time consuming when you don't get home from work until after 11 o'clock and all you want to do is sleep.
Yeah.
So I have limited time to fart around with things. So we are planning on a show next week. We will have a guest, and I'm going to forget his name. I knew I was going to do that. Well, his first name's Trevor, and he's from Beyond Belief. And we'll be talking to him. And yes, it'll be on the 5th. So the Hangouts going bye-bye doesn't happen till the 1st, so I can't really test anything until probably the 2nd. So we'll see what happens. But we may eventually have to go to just audio only. I don't know what's going to happen. They are offering the, as I said, the YouTube Live as an alternative, and I don't know how that's going to affect us. So we're just going to have to kind of wing it. So regretfully, Sammy PM'd me, and she's still stuck at work. You can find her on Facebook under Samantha Mondegreen. And Morgan is in the midst of moving, and so she couldn't be with us tonight. And you can find her at MoString on Twitter. And you can also find her on Facebook as well. And you can find me doing 9998 at Twitter. And that connects to my blog, Havoc and Chaos. And you can also find me on Facebook under Beth A. Hambridge. So there may be a test broadcast just to see what's going on next week, but it's not going to be more than 20 minutes tops. It's just going to be us fucking around trying to figure things out. So anybody that's tech savvy that knows what's going on and can like literally walk me through this, I would greatly appreciate it, because I am not tech savvy. I know just enough to blow up my computer, and I probably will do that, as Tucker discovered this week.
Yeah.
So I mean, plus I have Audacity tied in. I have XSplit, well, sort of tied in. It's not working right. I think they changed something and I didn't catch it, so I have to redo that. And then I also have Voicemeeter Banana that I use to hopefully control the audio. I don't know if that's even working right, so I have a lot of debugging to do to figure out which step we're gonna go. So with that, Tucker, thank you very much. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And Professor Fuzzness, nice to see you again.
He's over on the couch giving himself a bath.
Yeah, I don't know where mine is. Probably on the table, staring out the window at our one car that goes by every hour. But He is fine, so. But with that, I will bid you all adieu. Next episode will be episode 200. I have no clue what we're doing. Oh, maybe nothing special. I don't know. We'll see. But I bid you all adieu. Have a good night, y'all, and stay safe and all that fun stuff. Especially with we had a downpour today, so I don't know about anybody else. With that, I bid you good night.